From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line on this Tuesday. Nick Barris here. And we've got a good show on tap, as we always do for you this morning. We're going to be talking about an issue that's making headlines, obviously not just here in this country, even though it is a very big international story here, but all around the world. And it's what's happening right now in the country of Iraq. And the stories, and as it becomes more and more local for us here, and it does. We have folks here that we've done stories over the years who lost loved ones in the combat situation and the conflict there in Iraq over the years, and wondering if now the sacrifices that were made are just going away. And, you know, who's to blame for this? How we address this issue? Really what's happening? I'm not the man to answer those questions. And you may have questions like I do. You see the number on the screen, 737-7587, talking about the U.S. exit from Iraq and what happens and whether or not we return with more. We're going to talk about that this morning with a professor from Lipscomb who knows far better than me, Marc Schwerdt. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning, Nick. How are you?
Nice to have you on. Thanks for it. It's been a while since we've seen you. And when I first walked into the studio, besides welcoming him, I said, you know, this is a good topic to have you back on for today. Talk about, the different courses you teach. You teach a variety, but I mean, you look at this kind of stuff, international relations.
Sure. We have to deal with, you know, this type of situation not only as an issue of international relations, but also of American diplomacy, American foreign policy, and even American domestic politics, because it influences our elections and the people that we choose as our leaders.
Well, we certainly had you on when all of this was happening. We've talked about this topic. All right, let me get your take right now, and we're going to take phone calls, your opinions on what's happening, your questions and thoughts as well back at home. Call us in now. The lines are open. But all right, your take on what you see happening over there right now.
Well, I think what you see over there is this is an explosion of what you would call, I guess, latent divisions between Sunnis and Shiites and Kurds. Okay. And this is something that has its roots in things that go back, you know, that are very fundamental in terms of divisions between different groups, nationality as well as ethnicity and well as religion. But the way it's going right now, I think, can be squarely laid at the feet of the present president of Iraq, which is Nouri al-Maliki. He's a Shiite, and instead of ruling Iraq in such a way that he brings people in, essentially what he's done is do things in terms of promoting Shiite interests and things in the south, because that's where the Shiites are, and then also pushing Sunnis out and pushing them away, and doing things to sort of undermine their sense of, hey, we're a part of this as well. And so the Sunnis have sort of been pushed into this very radical group's arms, because that's the group that's opposing the Shiites.
And the radical group, is that ISIS?
That is ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. So you see a connection here between what's going on in Syria right now as well. But this group is largely a successor to al-Qaeda in Iraq. So we're not really talking about al-Qaeda per se in terms of Osama bin Laden or anything like that, because Osama bin Laden's not an Iraqi. Right. But we are seeing an extension of, okay, we're trying to restore a Arab caliphate. And Iraq and Saudi Arabia and, you know, much of that region is part of that sort of historical identity.
Okay. It is interesting and it is complex, and I thought that was a very good overview. Now, I think for the average American, and I'm certainly among the average Americans here that think back to, you know, the whole purpose of going into Iraq and, you know, the questions of Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction and getting rid of him, and then the vision perhaps that President Bush had of someday having a democracy that functions right there in Iraq. And then the idea, of course, would be to eventually pull out and allow them to self-govern and run it right. And there were a lot of critics that said it's not that easy to reverse that. And we see that vision going down the tubes, and much of what many people, and I think even you maybe predicted back when all this was happening, was that it's going to be a lot more difficult than we think it is going to be, and short of leaving a massive U.S. presence there, which I don't think anyone wants to do, once we pull out, who knows what's going to happen?
Well, and those weren't our only choices. There were several mistakes I made ever since 2003. You can argue that the original invasion was a mistake itself, but we can definitely put our finger on that the follow-through of stabilizing Iraq, providing security, we didn't really put much effort into. and we can lay that at the feet of the Bush administration. And then we have the surge, which comes along around 2007. And it looks like we stabilize things and get things sort of on the right track. And that's when you sort of have the first stabilizing elections, and this is when al-Maliki really comes into power. The Sunnis and the Shiites are kind of buying in. The Kurds in the north are playing their role as well. But there's a lot of tension there, you know, that goes back previous to our invasion. The Sunnis had ruled over Shiites and Kurds. They had mistreated them under Saddam and all this kind of thing. So, I mean, there's a lot of history there that has to be dealt with. It seemed like there was a window of opportunity there towards at the end of the Bush administration. Well, is this going to work? Because American deaths were almost non-existent. The car bombs, the suicide bombers, and all that kind of stuff seemingly had been dealt with. The Sunnis, again, were participating. And then, as we started to tail off with the election of President Obama and his promise to get us out of Iraq and things like that.
Which is what Americans wanted.
It's what we wanted. Is it what the way we should have handled it? I mean, again, there's other choices we could have made. Is it a choice between all in or all out? And I don't think that was our only choice, but we could have maintained something of a presence, which is what the military wanted. You know, the military wanted to keep, like, say, about 25 or 30,000 troops there, which would be a stabilizing influence. It's not that we would be micromanaging, but we would, in a sense, be managing the situation.
Just by being there with that force.
And that can be a stabilizing thing.
What do we have there now?
Roughly nothing.
Nothing, really.
I mean, we've got the State Department presence. You know, we have our largest embassy in the world there.
So we have diplomats there.
And we have contractors, you know, which is everything from people who are helping to build schools all the way to security and things like that. So that's several thousand people right there. So there is a fairly large American presence, but it's not the official American presence, and it's very minimal in terms of, you know, our ability to influence things.
So because of that, we see all this developing. And all right, I'm wondering too, when Saddam Hussein was in power, and keep in mind, folks, we never located any weapons of mass destruction, but he was certainly a bad guy, and the people there, you know, didn't want him around. But he, at the time of his power, if an organization like ISIS started making noise, he pretty much took care of that, didn't he?
Well, sure. And that's what some people would say. You know, we should have left him in power to take care of organizations like that.
That was my question. My concern right now, as we look and it moves forward, if, you know, ISIS continues to, and they take control in this country, and it's the al-Qaeda element. I mean, can you make the argument that we're worse off now if ISIS takes over than we were when Saddam Hussein was in power, keeping in mind we never found weapons of mass destruction? I think you can make a valid argument that the American interests maybe are worse off. I don't know about the Iraqis, how they would feel.
Well, again, it depends a lot on what you mean by American interests.
Okay, well, right.
I mean, if we say that the American interest is in maintaining the flow of oil, which is kind of at the root of most of this, and, you know, stop people from doing bad things, then American interests are being harmed right now because this does interrupt that flow. And the way it seems to be going right now, you're looking at a possible dismemberment of Iraq, which, you know, at least a couple of very prominent politicians, I think Democrat and Republican, said, you know what, maybe that's our best solution back around 5 or 6 years ago.
Wow. All right, listen, before we take our first break, I want to take one call, and then we'll take more as the show goes along. But let's go to Joe. Joe, good morning.
Good morning, Dave.
Hey, Joe.
Just listening to your guest here, but, you know, this thing was Iraq was a money war for George Bush and Dick Cheney and friends. We had no reason whatsoever to go in Iraq and get rid of Saddam Hussein. He wasn't a threat to us, and it was all about the oil. He just got through saying, well, you know, but this Iraq business will go down with Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan as being another United States mistake. And then we'll get back in it again. And we almost stretched to the limit here with Afghanistan and all this other stuff that's going on. I just think, you know, we need to quit meddling in some of these other countries. This was, you know, you got 3 different religions over there. And like you said a while ago, when Saddam Hussein was in control, like it or not, he kept the thing straight. And here we go over meddling with him and get rid of him, and then it's been messed up ever since. and it's going to continue going on. I mean, we're just getting back into another mess.
Yeah, Joe, thank you for your call. I think a lot of people are thinking the same way Joe is, maybe.
There's a lot of exhaustion here, obviously, among the American people, and frustration. To say that Saddam Hussein was a better state of affairs, you know, you've got to really look closely at that before you conclude that per se. Just because Saddam Hussein killed hundreds of thousands of his own people, he killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians, and he was a loose cannon. Now, by the time this 2003 invasion came along, you could argue that his teeth had sort of been pulled. Was he going to eventually sort of go back to being a bad guy because we sort of, you know, withdrew from the Middle East because, you know, we got tired of maintaining the no-fly zones and things like that? You know, I think you could speculate that that's a possibility. But I wouldn't necessarily say that Saddam Hussein, you know, was a better state of affairs. Now, it's more, you know, upset right now. And, you know, again, American interests are, we're not really being served by keeping Saddam Hussein in power. Yeah. And so I think we had a sort of a choice between two devils, in a way. We had an opportunity here that was, some people might argue, was unwise.
I think the frustration as we go to the break for many Americans, and the frustration for me is, you know, right now, and you may be absolutely right, you make an excellent point there, is it better or not? I'm just saying, for the financial and, more importantly, the human sacrifice made in that country, the payoff has to be a heck of a lot better than, I'm not sure if what we have now is better than Saddam Hussein. We can debate that. No. With the sacrifice of all the American lives and the billions of dollars that this country spent on that, we darn better have a more clear-cut result than, I'm not sure if we're better off. Maybe we are. Let's debate it. If there's a debate, you lost. Okay, that's my take as an American looking at it. If we're debating this now that, well, was it really better? We lost. It better be more than that for what was sacrificed.
But if you're going to argue that we should have just left it alone, that we didn't have any interest in whether or not Saddam Hussein was in power at all, then, yeah, I think you're mistaken.
Yeah. Okay, right. Now, but whether or not it was worth going in and what the true reasons were, since, you know, we still remember Colin Powell, you know, and the whole thing of, you know, you break it, you own it, and all of that.
Yeah, I do. But you know what? That comes back to, this is not an either-or question.
Yeah.
Follow-through mattered a lot, and that's both where the Bush administration and also the Obama administration has fallen very short.
Yeah. Once it's happened, you got to follow through.
You do.
You're right. All right, listen, on that note, we'll take a break. When we come back, the line's open, 737-7587, the number. We've got some lines there that are open if you'd like to call in your opinion, your thoughts. What should we do? Should we send more troops back to Iraq? Do we have to do this to restabilize it, or is it time just to let it go and see what happens? And how do you feel right now about what we were just discussing? If you're on hold, stay there. We'll get to your calls, continue our conversation right after this.
Go, break.